Hi there, I'm Farah. And on my 20th birthday, my parents kept telling me, just wait, something big is coming. Turns out, it wasn't a party. It wasn't a gift. It was the moment I finally realized I was never really part of this family. For years, they smiled in my face, while taking everything behind my back, my tuition money, my future, even my name on a loan I never signed. They laughed about me when they thought I wasn't listening. They erased me from their will like I was nothing. But the worst part wasn't what they took. It was how long they let me believe I mattered. You think that's the worst of it? Wait until you hear how far they went to make sure I stayed invisible. For weeks, my parents had kept dropping hints like confetti at a surprise party I wasn't invited to. Just wait, my mother kept saying. Something big is coming. My dad would nod along with that smile, the one that never quite reached his eyes. My siblings, Vesper and Calum, would shoot each other these knowing looks whenever I asked what was going on, like I was the only one not in on the joke. It was spring in Charleston, the kind of soft, bright April that made the air smell like wet grass and blooming jasmine. I was turning 32, old enough to know that surprises rarely worked in my favor, but young enough to still hope, foolishly, that maybe this time would be different. The day started normally. I woke early, checked my email out of habit, grabbed a coffee from the corner cafe on my way to the design firm where I'd worked the last 6 years. My phone buzzed around noon. Mom again. You're gonna love what's coming. Just wait till tonight. I smiled politely, texted back a thumbs-up emoji, but something inside me stayed unsettled. After work, I passed by the university's bursar office. I had been taking night classes for my master's in digital arts. Nothing major, one course at a time, paid up front. I logged in to check my account, planning to make next month's tuition payment. My stomach dropped. Zero balance. No, worse, not just zero. It said withdrawal confirmed, $2,000, gone. I stared at the screen, trying to breathe past the sudden tightness in my chest. It wasn't possible. I knew I hadn't touched that money. That account was for tuition only. I'd been putting aside every extra dollar I had to avoid student loans. I checked again. Same result. The withdrawal date? 3 days ago. On the drive home, I kept replaying the past few weeks in my head. The way Mom and Dad had smiled a little too wide. How Vesper had joked at Sunday dinner. Don't worry, Farah. You'll finally feel included. I had laughed then, but now the words crawled under my skin. When I walked through the front door that evening, the house was too quiet. No balloons, no decorations, just the tick of the kitchen clock. Mom was in the living room, scrolling her phone, her feet tucked under her like she didn't have a care in the world. Hey, sweetheart, she greeted without looking up. Everything okay? I swallowed. Did you take money from my tuition account? She blinked like I'd asked if she borrowed sugar. Oh, that? Don't worry about it. You'll understand after tonight. Just trust us, okay? Trust. That word hit harder than I expected. I nodded stiffly and went upstairs, locking the door behind me. It wasn't until later, around 9, after dinner and small talk that felt like swallowing broken glass, that I checked my email again. A notification from one of the credit monitoring sites I'd signed up for years ago, mostly to protect myself from phishing scams. Alert. New loan opened in your name. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clicked the link. A personal loan for $7,000. Taken out 4 days ago. Cosigner. Seraphine Duval. My mother. The room tilted. I scrolled through the fine print. My name everywhere. My credit score stamped at the bottom like a joke. She hadn't even told me. I wanted to run downstairs, to scream, to demand how she could possibly think this was okay. But instead, I sat there frozen, staring at the screen, the weight of years pressing down on my chest. This wasn't the first time my parents made decisions for my own good without asking me. But this was theft. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. It was almost 10 now, the hum of cicadas weaving with the distant sound of cars along the harbor. I forced myself to breathe, to think. Instead of storming downstairs, I started gathering everything. Screenshots of the bank withdrawal, the loan document, emails. If they wanted to play games, I would keep score. By midnight, I was staring at the ceiling, the glow of my phone screen fading beside me. That's when it happened. The message. A ping. From Vesper. Make sure she doesn't find out before tomorrow. It'll ruin everything. I stared at it, my heart slowing. The message disappeared a second later, deleted, but not before I saw it. They weren't planning something for me. They were planning something without me. The message wasn't meant for me, but it confirmed my worst fear. I sat there in the dark, the glow from my phone burning into my eyes. That one sentence from Vesper wasn't just a mistake. It was a confession. Proof that whatever my family had been planning wasn't for me. It was about me. Or worse, against me. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling until dawn began creeping in, washing the room with that soft, colorless light before sunrise. My mind kept looping the last few weeks, every time they'd smiled a little too much, every vague promise of a big surprise. By 7:30, I had showered, dressed, and opened my laptop. I needed to distract myself, but my hands hovered over the keyboard without typing. My stomach twisted, heavy with something I hadn't wanted to name before. Dread. The ping of another message pulled me back. This time, it wasn't from Vesper. It was from Aunt Celeste, in the family group chat. Make sure you leave early tomorrow. Don't let Farah find out. It'll ruin the trip. The message sat there for 2 full seconds before disappearing. Deleted. But not before I screenshotted it. I stared at the image, the edges of my vision pulsing. So it wasn't just Vesper. It was all of them. My parents, my siblings, even Celeste. Planning a trip without me, whispering behind my back like I was some fragile ornament they'd decided didn't belong on the shelf anymore. My phone buzzed again. Mom, texting like nothing had happened. Morning, honey. Big day tomorrow. Hope you're ready. Ready for what? To be left behind. I spent the afternoon going through work emails half-heartedly, distracted by the weight pressing against my ribs. Around 5, I shut my laptop, unable to focus anymore. I needed air, space, something to clear the fog creeping into my chest. I grabbed my jacket and headed out, letting my feet take me through the quiet streets of our neighborhood. Magnolia trees lined the sidewalks, petals scattered like confetti on the pavement. I barely noticed. As the sun began to set, casting gold over the rooftops, I found myself circling back home. My parents' car wasn't in the driveway, which didn't surprise me. They were probably at Celeste's, finalizing whatever betrayal they thought I hadn't caught on to. I almost walked straight to my room, but something stopped me outside the kitchen. Voices. Low, hurried. I leaned closer. Vesper's voice, sharp and familiar. She's not going to find out, don't worry. Then Calum. She's too busy with her boring job to notice anything, and even if she does, well, maybe it's time she learns her place. Vesper laughed, soft but cutting. After this trip, she'll finally get it. We're done pretending. My chest tightened so hard it felt like I couldn't breathe. They weren't just forgetting me. They were erasing me. On purpose. I backed away quietly, careful not to make the floorboards creak. Upstairs, I closed my bedroom door, my fingers shaking as I opened my phone and typed a single sentence into my notes app. They want me gone. I spent the next hour saving everything. The messages, the screenshots, even the timestamp of the conversation I'd overheard. Not because I wanted to confront them yet, but because I needed to remember I wasn't crazy. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling again. But instead of replaying their words, my mind began piecing together every moment that had led to this. The subtle digs at family dinners, the way my parents always prioritized Vesper and Calum's needs over mine, how they'd told me I was too serious, too sensitive, too much. It wasn't new. It had been happening for years. And tomorrow, my birthday, would be the final proof. But before I could sink fully into sleep, I got up, restless, and walked over to the old bookshelf in the hallway. My fingers ran over the spines until they stopped at a dusty, leather-bound photo album. I hadn't opened it in years. Back in my room, I flipped the cover open, and there it was. A picture I hadn't thought about in over a decade, a forgotten memory I had buried long ago. I turned the page of the album slowly, my fingers brushing over the worn photograph like it might disappear if I moved too fast. In the picture, I couldn't have been older than 5, small, dark-haired, sitting alone on a park bench. My knees scraped, hands folded neatly in my lap, no smile. The memory hit me like cold water, that day at Hampton Park. I had been too young to understand why no one came back for me. We'd gone there for a family picnic. Me, Vesper, Calum, Mom, and Dad. The weather had been warm, the air sticky with spring. They'd packed sandwiches and sodas, and I'd been so excited to spend the afternoon outside. Somewhere between chasing butterflies and climbing the jungle gym, I had wandered off. I remembered sitting down when I got tired, thinking they'd come back any minute. But they didn't. They didn't even realize I was missing. Hours later, a park officer had found me, alone and crying quietly. He brought me home, where Mom opened the door and gasped like she'd seen a ghost. "Oh my God, we didn't even notice. You're so quiet, sweetie. You're like a little shadow sometimes." She'd laughed like it was a joke, brushing it off. Dad had ruffled my hair and said, "You've got to learn to keep up, kiddo." They told the story at family parties for years. How little Farah had vanished for an afternoon because she was too quiet, too serious, too easy to forget. I closed the album gently, like if I slammed it shut, the memory would spill out and drown me. It wasn't the first time they'd forgotten me. It was the first time I'd realized they never even looked. The house was silent around me, the kind of deep silence that presses against your skin. Outside, the streetlights buzzed faintly, throwing soft halos onto the pavement. My phone lay beside me, dark and still. Lying back, I stared at the ceiling again, feeling the weight in my chest growing heavier. That day in the park wasn't an accident. It wasn't a one-off. It was the blueprint. Every missed school recital, every dinner conversation where I faded into the wallpaper, every birthday where they gave Vesper and Calum the spotlight and handed me a candle to hold. It all made sense now. I'd spent years thinking I needed to work harder, speak louder, smile bigger so they'd see me. But tonight, I saw them. I saw who they were, and I saw who I wasn't to them. I sat up, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. My hands moved on their own, grabbing my phone, reopening every screenshot I had saved. The messages, the loan, the missing tuition, Celeste's slip-up, Vesper's deleted text, all of it. Each one another breadcrumb in a trail I could no longer ignore. The clock on my nightstand blinked 2:13 a.m. I should have been asleep, resting before the so-called big day my family kept promising me. Instead, I was wide awake, my mind sharper than it had been in years. I wasn't going to play along anymore. I wouldn't wait for their surprise. I would prepare for it. Downstairs, the faint murmur of voices drifted up the staircase. I glanced at the clock again. It was too late for casual conversation. I crept to my door, easing it open just a crack. Laughter floated up from the living room. Familiar, casual, but tinged with something else. Something mean. I could hear Mom's voice, light and sweet. "She's always been a little slow, you know. Never quite caught on." Vesper's laugh followed. "That's why tomorrow will be so much fun. She'll finally get the message." A chair scraped against the hardwood floor. Calum's voice, quieter but unmistakable. "She won't see it coming. She never does." The words hit harder than anything else so far. They weren't laughing about something funny. They were laughing about me. I didn't need to hear the punchline to know the joke was on me. The sound of their laughter stuck with me long after it faded. It echoed in the silence of my room, bouncing off the walls like a cruel reminder of where I stood in this family. Or rather, where I didn't. By the time morning came, I hadn't slept. I drifted between restless thoughts and stiff resentment, the weight of their words pressing down harder than the pillow beneath my head. The day crawled by with unbearable normalcy. My parents moved around the house like nothing had happened, like they hadn't been laughing about me the night before. Vesper hummed in the kitchen. Calum joked with Dad over coffee. Mom asked if I wanted pancakes, smiling like everything was fine. I almost wanted to scream. By evening, they called me down for dinner. I could have made an excuse, stayed in my room, but something told me to show up. If they wanted a show, I'd sit front row. The table was set perfectly. Candles, my mother's best dishes, the smell of roast chicken heavy in the air. A birthday dinner, they claimed. But it felt like walking into a lion's den wearing a paper crown. Vesper raised her glass first, flashing me a wide smile. "To our little sister, the serious one," Dad chuckled. "Always so focused, never quite gets the joke." Caleb leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Maybe tonight she'll finally lighten up." Mom chimed in sweetly. "You know, Farah, we just want you to loosen up, sweetheart. You always make things so heavy." I kept my face neutral, slicing into the chicken on my plate, even as my stomach twisted. Vesper added casually, "Maybe tomorrow, when you see what we've got planned, you'll finally smile." Caleb nodded, wiping his mouth. "If she even notices." The table erupted in light laughter. I stayed quiet, chewing slowly, my eyes fixed on my plate. They thought I was too quiet? Good. Let them wonder what I was thinking. After dinner, I helped clear the dishes without a word. Mom hummed beside me at the sink, acting like nothing was off, like they hadn't just mocked me to my face. Typical. Later that night, once everyone had gone upstairs, I sat at the kitchen table alone. The overhead light cast long shadows across the countertop. I reached for the pile of mail near the fridge, flipping absently through overdue bills and grocery lists, until something caught my eye. A legal-sized envelope, half open, the name on it unmistakable. Ambrose Duval, Last Will and Testament. A cold wave passed through me. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. The draft was dated 3 weeks ago. The contents? Everything. The house, the savings, the investments, all to be divided between Vesper and Caleb. My name wasn't mentioned once. Not even out of obligation. My fingers tightened around the paper as if I could will the words to change. They weren't just planning to exclude me from a trip. They had erased me from their lives. Officially, legally. This wasn't neglect. It wasn't ignorance. It was a choice. I sat there for a long time, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. Somewhere upstairs, I could hear Mom laughing softly at something on TV. Something inside me shifted then, like a crack running through glass. There was nothing left to hope for. Tomorrow wasn't about celebration. It was about confirmation. As I folded the will back into the envelope and slipped it beneath the pile of mail, I heard the faint buzz of a phone downstairs. A voice. Mom's. Muffled but sharp. "I don't care what she thinks. Just make sure Rowan stays out of this. We don't need her meddling." I froze. They weren't done yet, and now they were targeting the only person left who still stood by me. I stood frozen in the dark, Mom's voice still ringing in my ears. It wasn't enough for them to cut me out. Now, they wanted to cut out Rowan too. The one person who had never made me feel like an afterthought. The next morning, I went through the motions. I brewed coffee. I folded the blanket on the couch. I smiled when Mom greeted me with her overly sweet, "Happy birthday, darling," like she hadn't been scheming the night before. By noon, I had answered a few work emails, forcing myself to look productive, even though my stomach churned. That's when I heard her again. Mom's voice, sharp and deliberate, floating through the half-open kitchen door. "Rowan, sweetheart, I wanted to touch base before tonight." My chest tightened. I edged closer, careful not to make a sound. "We've planned something really special for Farah. It's a family thing, you understand. We wouldn't want her distracted. I'm sure she's told you how sensitive she can be." There was a pause. Then Mom's voice softened, almost syrupy. "If you really care about her, you'll step back and let us handle this." My hands curled into fists. Rowan's voice filtered faintly through the speakerphone. "I don't think she'll see it that way." Mom's reply was instant, cold. "Well, she doesn't need to know. It's what's best for her. We know how to take care of our own." I backed away before I could hear the rest, my heart pounding. They were making sure I had no one left. That evening, dinner was quiet, too quiet. The weight of unspoken words hung heavy around the table. No one mentioned Rowan. No one mentioned anything real. Afterward, I went upstairs, my footsteps deliberate, heavy against the wood. I sat at my desk, staring at my reflection in the dark window. My birthday, the day they'd promised something big. They weren't lying. They were about to erase me completely. I scribbled a note and left it on the kitchen table, the pen pressing hard into the paper. You can plan all you want, but I'm done playing your game. Then I went back upstairs, shutting my door gently but firmly behind me. The next day, sometime in the early afternoon, Rowan's name flashed across my phone screen. Your mom called me, her text read. Said you'd be busy tonight with family. I didn't want to make things harder for you. Let me know when you want to talk. My throat tightened. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I didn't reply. I couldn't drag her into this any further. The afternoon dragged on, each hour crawling slower than the last. I watched the clock hit 5, then 6, the weight of everything pressing against my chest. The house was too quiet. By 7, I was curled up on my bed, the day nearly done, the silence louder than any celebration they could have planned. That's when my phone buzzed again, a new notification, and when I saw what it was, I knew. This was it, the final push I needed. I grabbed my phone without thinking, thumb swiping across the screen. The notification glowed like a flare in the dark. A photo, posted by Vesper. I tapped it open, and there it was, the final knife in my back. My family, standing on a sunlit beach, all of them. Mom in her favorite sundress, Dad grinning like he hadn't spent the last month tearing me apart. Vesper, flawless as always, her arms slung casually around Caleb's shoulders. Even Aunt Celeste in the background holding a cocktail. The caption hit harder than the image. Finally, a family getaway. No negativity, just fun. #family time, #freedom. Beneath it, a comment from Vesper. Good thing Farah won't notice. She's too boring anyway. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. The timestamp on the post? Yesterday. The day before my birthday. The day they all promised to make special. My throat tightened as I swiped through the rest of Vesper's feed. Photo after photo. Dinner by the water, sunset selfies, cocktails lined up on the table. Story clips of them laughing, dancing, living. Without me. They hadn't just left me out. They'd planned this. They'd stolen my tuition money, lied to my face, and spent it on a trip. A celebration of freedom from me. My fingers hovered over the phone, trembling. For a moment, I wanted to throw it across the room, to scream, to let the rage spill out of me like wildfire. But I didn't. Instead, I set it down carefully and walked to the window. Outside, the Charleston streets were still and quiet, the occasional car passing by in the distance. The same streets I'd walked 1,000 times, trying to find my place in a family that never wanted me. I sat down at my desk, pulled my laptop toward me, and opened the folder I'd been building. Screenshots, bank statements, messages, the loan paperwork with my name tied to it. Everything. Piece by piece, I laid it out like a puzzle, the picture finally clear. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had erased me, intentionally, methodically, and tonight, they had made it public. I stopped crying somewhere between saving the last screenshot and renaming the folder, Receipts. The clock read 9:37 p.m. when I finally sat back. My room was dark except for the glow of my screen, my phone still lying face down on the bed. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't even angry. I was done. Done letting them decide my worth. Done playing the quiet daughter, the afterthought, the joke. The sound of the front door slamming downstairs startled me. Footsteps moved quickly across the hardwood floor, muffled voices sharp and frantic. I reached for my phone just as another notification lit up the screen. A message, but not from them, from Rowan. And when I read it, I realized their attack wasn't over. This time they were going after the only person I had left. The message from Rowan was short, but it knocked the air out of me. Your mom called me. She told me to leave you alone. She said I'm making everything worse, that I'm a bad influence. Farah, she said if I keep texting you, she'll make sure I lose my scholarship. I read it 3 times before the words finally sank in. They'd threatened her. They hadn't just tried to shut me out. Now they were coming for the only person left who cared about me. My phone slipped from my hand onto the bed as I sat frozen, the weight of their cruelty settling heavy in my chest. It wasn't enough for them to cut me out. They wanted to cut me off, make sure I had no one, nowhere to turn. For a long moment I didn't move. Then something inside me snapped. I stood up, pacing my room like my skin was too tight. Their laughter, their lies, the will, the fake smiles, the beach photos, it all swirled in my head like a storm. And now they were trying to ruin Rowan's life too. I wouldn't let them. I stormed downstairs without thinking, needing to move, needing to breathe. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I passed the kitchen, my eyes catching something out of place on the counter. Mom's old iPad, unlocked. She must have forgotten to log out after checking recipes or her online banking, the way she always did. Normally, I wouldn't care. But tonight wasn't normal. Something told me to look. I picked up the iPad, opened the Messages app out of habit, and there it was. At the top of the list, a group chat. Family without Farah. My heart stopped. I tapped it open, and what I found nearly buckled my knees. Message after message, weeks, months, all of them mocking, scheming, cruel. She's always been so dramatic. Don't tell her about the trip, she'll ruin the vibe. Can't believe she still thinks she's part of this family. Honestly, it'll be easier without her hanging around. Make sure Rowan doesn't drag her back in. Even Dad, even Calum, even Celeste. Every single one of them, laughing behind my back, erasing me from their lives like I was nothing but noise. My hands shook as I scrolled further. Photos of their family dinners, without me. Plans for their beach trip, months before they told me anything. Even the day they applied for the loan in my name, Seraphine had written, "She'll never notice, she never does." My chest felt hollow, like something had cracked wide open and there was nothing left inside. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I took screenshots, every message, every comment, every plan to humiliate me. Then I closed the iPad gently, carefully, and walked back upstairs like nothing had happened. In my room, I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and added every screenshot to the folder I had been building. Receipts, evidence. I stared at the screen, my pulse steady, my mind clear. The game was over. They wanted me invisible. They wanted me erased. But tomorrow, I'd make sure they could never hide what they'd done. The house was silent when I woke the next morning. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful. It was empty, hollow, like the aftermath of a storm. But I wasn't empty. I knew exactly what I had to do. After showering, I sat at my desk, pulling my hair back into a tight ponytail, keeping my hands busy so I wouldn't lose focus. There was no more room for doubt, no more space left for hope. I opened my laptop and printed everything, every screenshot, every message, the loan application, the withdrawal slips from the bank account, the group chat, the one they thought I'd never see. I sorted the papers into neat stacks, sliding them into a folder labeled in big black letters, Receipts. It took me over an hour, but when I zipped the folder shut, it felt like I was sealing away the last decade of being invisible. By late afternoon, the front door slammed downstairs, loud voices and luggage thuds filling the space like they hadn't disappeared days ago. I didn't rush. I waited until I heard their footsteps scatter. Mom probably unpacking, Vesper laughing too loudly about something, Dad on the phone. Then I walked downstairs, folder in hand. They were gathered in the living room, still sun-kissed from their little beach escape, chatting casually like they hadn't spent the last week erasing me. Mom noticed me first. "Oh, sweetheart, we've been planning something for you tonight. It'll be so special," Vesper chimed in from the couch. "Yeah, you're gonna love it. We figured you could use a little surprise." Dad barely glanced up from his phone. "Glad you finally came downstairs. We were wondering when you'd join us." I set the folder down on the dining table, flipping it open without a word. They all fell quiet. "What's this?" Calum asked, voice tightening. I looked at them, really looked, for the first time in weeks. "This," I said calmly, "is who you really are." One by one, I slid the papers across the table. The screenshots from the group chat, the bank records, the loan in my name, the photo album from their beach trip, the comments about how boring and negative I was, the threats against Rowan. Vesper's smile disappeared first. Mom's hands started to fidget. Dad set his phone down slowly, the tension sharp in his jaw. For the first time, none of them had anything to say. I stood there in the middle of the room, not waiting for their apologies, because I knew they wouldn't come. I took a slow breath and said the words I had rehearsed in my head all night. I'm done. Mom blinked like she hadn't heard me right. Farah, sweetheart. No, I cut her off, my voice steady. You've made it clear. You've been making it clear for years. I'm not part of this family, so I won't be your scapegoat anymore. I slid one final paper toward them. A list of my accounts, my tuition paperwork, everything I had moved out of their control. I'm moving out, I said simply, and I will no longer pay for any of this. For you. Dad scoffed, trying to regain control. Farah, don't be dramatic. You're misunderstanding. I understand perfectly, I replied. I understand more than you ever wanted me to. I turned to leave, but before I reached the stairs, I paused. If any of you try to manipulate me again, I said without looking back, I'll make sure everyone sees what's in that folder. I walked upstairs, my legs trembling but my back straight. For the first time, the silence in the house wasn't suffocating. It felt like freedom. But even after all this, one question lingered. Would they ever truly regret it? The next morning, the house felt heavier than ever. No one spoke at breakfast. The folder I had left on the dining table was still there, untouched, like a loaded gun no one dared to pick up. I ate quietly at the counter, while Mom moved stiffly around the kitchen, her movements sharper than usual. Vesper wasn't there. She hadn't come home the night before. Dad scrolled his phone without looking at me. It was over. But the weight of what remained wasn't something I could shake off in a day. That afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the blinds, Seraphine finally broke the silence. You've always been so dramatic, Farah, she muttered, rinsing a mug at the sink. You act like we were monsters. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. You never understood, she continued, her voice brittle. How hard it was to love someone who kept pushing us away. I turned to look at her then. Really look. Her face wasn't angry. It wasn't even apologetic. It was defensive. Cornered. Because the truth wasn't that I pushed them away. It was that they'd been pushing me out for years. That night, Vesper came home, slammed her bedroom door without a word. Calum avoided me completely. Dad never even looked up from his emails. Not one of them apologized. Not one. 2 days later, I walked out of that house for good. With Rowan's help, I signed a lease on a tiny one-bedroom apartment not far from campus. It wasn't much. Cracked linoleum floors, outdated cabinets. But it was mine. Every box I unpacked felt like peeling away another layer of who they told me I was. Invisible. Forgettable. A footnote. Not anymore. When I filed to remove my parents as financial guardians, Seraphine called twice. I didn't pick up. Her last voicemail was short. You'll regret this. But I didn't. Instead, I shared my story anonymously on a student forum. Not the financial details, not the lawsuits that had already started brewing behind the scenes. Just the simple truth. Sometimes, the people who say they love you will also be the ones who erase you. And you don't owe them your silence. I never expected the flood of replies. Students, strangers, even professors who wrote, I've been there. You're not alone. It didn't fix everything. But it reminded me that I wasn't broken. The fallout came fast after that. The university launched an investigation into the misuse of my tuition funds. Seraphine's name appeared in formal reports. Identity fraud, financial misconduct. Dad's business partners quietly backed away once the whispers reached them. Clients stopped calling. Vesper vanished from social media. Calum never said a word. Months passed. Spring melted into summer, the heat settling heavy over Charleston's streets. One Saturday, I found myself walking past the old city park. The one where, years ago, they had forgotten me on a bench and laughed about it afterward like it was nothing. I paused at the entrance, watching the kids on the swings, the parents chatting on benches. That forgotten version of me, small, scared, waiting, wasn't here anymore. They tried to erase me, but I've never seen myself clearer. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A new message, not from them. It was from Rowan. Check your mailbox, I left something for you. I smiled. Small, real, because life always writes new chapters, even after the worst ones. Before I close this chapter, let me tell you something. Not as the girl who was forgotten on her 20th birthday, but as someone who finally stopped waiting for people to see her worth. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most will be the ones who hurt you the deepest. But their choices don't define who you are. You do. You are not invisible. You are not too much, too quiet, too serious, too anything. You are exactly enough, and you don't need anyone's permission to exist fully, to stand up for yourself, to rewrite your story. Family isn't always who you share blood with. Sometimes, family is who shows up when everyone else leaves. So now I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like the outsider in your own home? Have you ever had to walk away from people you thought would always be there? If this story touched something in you, drop A in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't like this story, tell me why. I want to know your perspective. This space is for real conversations. If you want more stories like this, raw, real, sometimes messy, but always honest, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching, for listening, for seeing me.